Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Excuse me. So I have to say it's always great coming back to the Envision conference here. I've been doing so for many years. There's something I think also very poetic about talking about the future of cities in one of the most historic cities in the world, and in a place where you can see how every age reinvents what the city is, right? And nowhere is that more visible than here in Rome. So it's quite wonderful. S.p.a has already given you, the history of ISI and Envision, and as Mr. Orsenigo mentioned, now we'll be talking about just the adoption and where we are and how we're growing. So I'm really proud, again, of the international partnerships that we've developed. We'll be celebrating next year 10 years of ISI and ICMQ partnering together for Envision in Italy. So we have maybe like our own Jubilee year to next year. But we have modeled this. So Italy was the first international partnership, and now we're seeing more partnerships developing across the Americas with Canada, Colombia, Guatemala, Chile. Everywhere in the world now is seeing this need for sustainability and infrastructure, and seeing infrastructure as the other key component of the built environment. So we've had and discussed sustainable buildings for many years, a few decades now, but I think there's a emerging realization that our infrastructure is just as important, if not more important, of an impact on our global sustainability, national, and especially within our cities. I would say too, as Professor Palalis mentioned, we've been doing this now for a while. I had hair when we started, but in the original, in the early days, it was a question of, is sustainability real? Should we be investing in this, trying to convince people? I think the conversation has completely shifted now. So again, as both Mr. Orsenigo and Professor Palalis mentioned, now the really sustainability is inevitable. It's understood, it's accepted. The key questions are how quickly, and how to do it in a very financially efficient way. And I think those are really positive changes in the dialogue that I'm excited about. So I mentioned the international partnerships. I also wanted to briefly mention China as a massive infrastructure creator and investor. We're working now in China as well with over 400 credentialed professionals there already, and we're excited to see the work that's being done. So again, as Mr. Orsenigo mentioned, I'll be discussing just Envision adoption and where we're seeing it. These are the projects, almost 400 now, either registered or completed through our verification program. A large number in the United States, but also in Canada, and of course Italy leading in Europe. And we're excited to see these numbers growing. As far as specifically within the United States, and this may get into a little bit more nuanced political discussion about if you know the geography of the United States, one thing that's exciting is, as I mentioned, the ubiquitousness of the conversation now. So maybe a few years ago when we talked about sustainable infrastructure, I don't know if this has a pointer. Yes. So, California, New York, people would say, sure, okay, the coasts, big cities, sustainability, they're there. But really, we're now seeing sustainable infrastructure and Envision use across the entire country, including in regions that politically would have been very resistant to it in the past. And you may know some of the politics, but in areas in Florida where you're not allowed to say sustainability, strange political rules, but really within the level of the city, they understand that. So that political discussion maybe with the higher level politics, but at the local community, they're adopting sustainability and Envision rapidly, and they see the strong connection, and they want to do this. So that's really where we see the strongest connection for us, is at that city and local agency level. And as far as the distribution of projects, again, Envision applies to all different types of infrastructure, but we've seen a strong adoption within water and transportation. Water used to be a larger percentage of the Envision projects. They were the early adopters. And I think strongly The reason for that is because of the natural connection with water infrastructure when you talk about sustainability, right? So when you think of water and the environment, society, economic impacts, anyone who works in water is going to say, of course, you know, we are on board, we're supportive. So water really engaged quickly, but transportation has been the fastest growing and has now, just within the last 2 years, overtaken water as the largest sector for us. There, I think it's a factor that when you look at the overall contributions of greenhouse gases, our transportation infrastructure is one of the key contributors in every country across the planet. They see the need to improve sustainability, but not just in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, to improve the impacts across all their the social, environmental, and economic factors. So transportation has been growing rapidly for us, and then in a more nuanced way within transportation, we see a pretty good distribution across road infrastructure, airports, which has been a very significant adoption, rail and light rail, transit systems, and then, of course, smaller ones with bridges and a mix. So, again, very good distribution across different modes of transportation, for sure. Oh, sorry, I think this is a duplicate. And as far as the training, so the Envision Sustainability Professional, or ENVSPs, how many ENVSPs are in the room, just by a quick show of hands? So many of you. Welcome. It's great to see you. So this is the association of those across different, whether they're private sector with companies and associations, public agencies, government employees, or academic institutions, those that are within that individual slice, that just means that in our system, they're not associated with a specific organization. So they may be government employees, they may be private sector, but probably they have taken this training as on their own initiative as an individual professional rather than through their company or organization. So I think that's in many ways inspiring as well. So while it's great to have the organizations adopting this, there seems to be a very strong trend within professionals, regardless of their organization, that this is what they're committed to and passionate about. We see that trend a lot with younger professionals as well, students and young people. They want to work on projects that they feel are going to have a positive impact on the world, on their community, that will inspire them as individuals. And we see a lot of the companies, at least in the US, I think it's probably everywhere, thinking of sustainability as a way to attract talent, to retain talent within their organizations, and how to position themselves more strategically. As far as the growth here, you know, we've consistently trained around 1,200 ENVSPs a year until the last couple years. So you see in 2022, an increase of about 20% or so, and then last year where we doubled the number of credentialed professionals. We have seen a massive wave of interest, and usually the credentialing program is the first wave indicator of future activity, right? So that's the first step people take. And then after they get trained, they want to bring Envision into their organization, start working on projects. So usually there's a 2 or 3 year lag between upticks in training and then upticks in projects and growth in projects. For us, I think part of this is attributed to post-COVID, the massive investments all around the world that are now going into infrastructure and the attributions of many of those funds to sustainability and resilience projects. So in the United States, we had the infrastructure bill, which was 1.2 trillion with a T, that is going to infrastructure. A significant portion of that is earmarked for projects that would be considered sustainable or resilient in some way. It, in many ways, for the United States, which is often behind Europe in our sustainability efforts, it represented a tripling or a quadrupling of funds for sustainability projects in our country. So we're very excited about that. But again, I think that trend, which is acute in the United States, is also being seen in almost every country around the world. So we're really, and it's a critical time for this. Infrastructure with the lifespans that we're talking about of 70 or 80 years, with the development timelines of taking 5 to 15 years to develop and build these projects. When we start thinking about what the world is going to be like in 2100, you know, other industries think of that as this big future far away. For infrastructure, that's today. We're building projects that will be in operation in 2100 right now. So there is really no time to waste. We can't sit back and wait to see how things will shake out, and maybe next year, maybe tomorrow we'll work on sustainability. It will be too late, and especially with the amount of investment that we're seeing right now, we will have missed this massive opportunity to make improvements. And then at that point, again, the infrastructure will be set, and it will be much more difficult for us to achieve our national and our planetary goals. So as far as the organizational members, again, we see very good distribution across all the industries of private sector, of government agencies, of university institutions, all adopting Envision and wanting to be supporters. Obviously, the public agencies, those are key, because as the infrastructure owners, they drive the market in many ways. So their adoption is very important. And we're seeing Envision now applied at many levels. So as Professor Palalis mentioned, the goal of Envision at the start was to say, okay, sustainability, it can be this nebulous. We all know what it is, but we also don't really know what it is. It's very nebulous. How do you pin it down and say specifically, this is what we're talking about, this is what we're measuring, and this is when we will know one from the other? When you're talking about infrastructure, this is a very precise industry. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like vagueness. If you're going to talk to the engineers and say we need to do something differently, they want to know how, exactly what should be different, why, what is the improvement going to be. And so with tools like Envision, that exists now. And in that way, it can work itself into the many different levels of infrastructure procurement. So at the national level, within legislation, within our procurement contracts, policies, within project specifications, design guidelines, it embeds itself. So I don't really have time to go through all of these, but just as some examples, in Canada, there's a federal regulation that all federally funded infrastructure go through a climate assessment. Envision is one of the ways in which they are allowed to meet that federal requirement. In California, there is an expedited permitting process for infrastructure because of the very long timelines. And if you use Envision on certain projects, you can go through a faster approval process, which is very important. In many cities and counties, in Miami County, so not just the city, but the entire county of Miami in southern Florida, they had a sustainable building program that said all county buildings will meet LEED. Now they are able to say buildings will meet LEED and all county infrastructure will use Envision. So for those cities that were really committed to sustainability, they had no counterpart to a sustainable building requirement. Now with Envision, they can do that. And we'll hear more about New York and what they're doing as well. And then it works its way into the request for proposals or tenders. The contract language, the specification, Envision can provide that structure, which is so critical. And then just wrapping up, I always like to show pretty pictures, but these are some of the recent projects. And I think what I'm most excited about with Envision is, as they work through the sustainability and incorporating the social, environmental, and economic aspects, what comes out is what we call multi-benefit projects. So this maybe was a water quality project that now is also incorporating transportation, green space within the city, mobility concerns. So you're integrating all of the different aspects of the city into every project that you do, rather than trying to solve one problem with one project. We see, of course, different rapid lines, bus transportation integrated with stormwater management. As I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of adoption within airports, the recognition of the important role that airports play, in many ways airports being small cities of their own, and how they can incorporate sustainability. transit projects, of course, public transit, but how do the transit projects, again, address water, address integration within other mobility networks? And then finally, this one is particularly exciting. This is the resiliency within New York City. So in 2012, there was a massive hurricane that flooded New York City. It really brought to attention the need for resilience. And New York is now in the process of building a massive seawall around the island of Manhattan. And through that, again, it would be very simple to just say, let's build a giant seawall. It'll be a big, ugly wall in one of the most iconic cities in the nation. So instead, they're looking at it as an integrated process where the seawall is within the park. So sometimes it's a wall. Sometimes it's a natural landscape that elevates the ground. Sometimes it's a barrier. It's adding parks to communities, connecting them across roads. So they're really looking at this in a really fascinating and integrated way. But it speaks to the need to think about sustainability not just at the project level, but at the city level. So how is the city itself going to address resiliency, not just each individual infrastructure system, but protecting the entire city? So with that, thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to the discussion.